Welcome back to the Witchy Concoction Spooky Tutorial. For this section of this tutorial, we are going to make the script that goes into the tool so that when the player walks up to this tool in the game or the experience and they click on it, it will clone a copy of the tool from replicated storage and place it into the player's backpack. So in order to do this, we need to make sure we have the part in replicated storage that we created, and we also have a copy of the part in workspace. And for this tutorial, I inserted an image of a cross, so I named my tool Cross. So you can name your tool whatever you want, but it will matter when you write your scripts what your names are, depending on how you write your script. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we are going to insert a script into the part that we put into the Shapes folder in Workspace, because it's the part we're going to walk up to and click. So if you click on the little H and then you click on the plus sign, in the drop down you'll see Script. Click on it to insert it. And when you do, a blank screen will open up in your studio window. And a blank script will always have the first line saying print hello world. You don't need that line, you can delete it. Okay, so I already have a script that I've set up for us to write in. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to delete this extra one. Okay. So when we write a script, we start with our variables. And this is, a variable is kind of like a definition. So the left side of your variable is the name of your variable. And then you'll have an equal sign, and on the right side you'll have the definition or the value. So you're setting a value to that name, and the value is the hierarchy setup of the Explorer window, and Roblox follows a parent-child hierarchy. So for example, when you look in your Explorer window, if you click on Workspace, you see that it has an arrow on the left side. So if I click that arrow, everything sitting inside of Workspace now shows up. Those are all the children of Workspace. Workspace is the parent, but camera, terrain, shapes, those are all the children. Spawn location, everything in Workspace is a child of Workspace. And then everything that's a child of Workspace, if it has an arrow next to it, so if I click on Shapes and I click on the arrow, all of the children of Shapes shows up. Okay? And then it can keep going. So all of my tools, if I click on the arrow next to them, the tools of this, the children of this tool show up, so on and so forth. Okay. Now anything that is a child of Workspace that also has children, those children become descendants of Workspace. So just a little brief description about hierarchy, because it's important when you set your variables, not your valuables, your values or your definitions for your variables. Okay, So first we're going to define the variables, because when we set a variable, it's because we're going to use it when we're writing the script. So we need it to be predetermined and predefined so that the script knows what it means. And the first thing I'm going to set a variable for is the little h, the part that the player is going to walk up and click on. And when they click it, the tool from replicated storage will be cloned into their backpack. So I'm going to write local on my, when I write my variables, I always put the word local in front of them. So I'm going to write local h. That's what I'm going to name it. And I'm going to just stick with what I already have it named to keep the script very clean and understandable. It's important to have proper naming conventions so that if you come back to your code later, you don't get confused and you can tell what you're doing. Then I'm going to type an equal sign. And then now on the right side of the equal sign, I'm going to define it following the hierarchy setup. And I'm going to type script.parent. Now, in this case, the script is a child of H. And in this situation, I am writing bottom to top instead of top to bottom, which is why I write script.parent. And in this, when you go from bottom to top like this, you can use the word parent. You don't have to say the word H. If you're going to write it using the H, you have to go from the top to bottom format. So there are two ways I could write this variable. I can do script.parent, but I could also say local h equals game.workspace.shapes.cross.h, following the full hierarchy of this game. So we're in the game, and within the game I have these buckets, and one of the buckets is workspace. Okay? And shapes is a child of workspace. And then the tool that I'm trying to write the script in is cross, and it's a child of shapes. And then H is a child of cross. So I followed the full hierarchy to get to H. But to shorten code, a lot of times wherever you put your script, you can do the bottom up, and you can just write script.parent, which points to H. And that's what I have done for this script. Okay? You could do it either way. All right, next I'm going to write a variable for the click detector. And the click detector is a child of H. Okay, and I already set the variable of H, so now I can use that variable when I write my variable for the click detector. So I'm going to write local click equals H dot click detector. Okay, so H is the parent and the click detector is a child of H. Next, I'm going to write a variable for replicated storage. So local rs equals game.replicated storage. Replicated storage is a container for objects that are available to both the server and the client. The server is the server housed at the Roblox facility. The client is the player's device, like a PC or a laptop or a mobile device. The server is the main container for the game, and the client is a copy of the game on the player's device. Okay. Now I'm going to write a variable for the shapes, where the shapes folder that sits in replicated storage. So I'm going to call it local shapes equals, since I already defined replicated storage, I'm going to use just rs, since I already set that variable, so the script knows where to look for replicated storage. Then I'm going to put colon, wait for child. Now what wait for child does is it's saying wait for this child to load into the game, because script runs really fast and sometimes the game is not fully loaded when that script is already being executed. So wait for child says wait for whatever child you've described in the parentheses to load. And for this variable, that child is shapes. The name of that child is shapes. So in quotations, we're going to write shapes because we named the shapes folder in replicated storage shapes. Okay, and then I'm also going to set up a boolean. Now, a boolean is true or false. It's a variable that you can set up, and its value is either going to be true or it's going to be false. And we can use it like an on and off switch, like a toggle, to go back and forth in our script between true and false. And you can name it whatever you want. A lot of people name it a boolean. Some people or might, name it, I could just say local okay. I can name it anything I want. I'm going to name this one has tool equals false, because originally the player doesn't have the tool. So I tried to use something descriptive of what we're doing. Does the player have the tool or does the player not have the tool? So has tool equals false. Okay. So those are the variables we've set up, and typically your variables are set up at the top of your script, but you may be writing script and then later on have to define variables as you go. So they don't all have to be at the very top. Just the variables you already know you're going to be working with should be defined at the top. And you can go back and insert more variables up here later on. Okay. Script is read from top to bottom. So if you're trying to use something in script that you haven't defined yet, then the script isn't going to recognize it and it's not going to work. So just keep that in mind. All right, now we're going to write a function. And a function is used to execute code later on in your script when you call that function. Okay, everything inside of the function. So you're going to have an opening part of the function and then an end to the function, and everything in between the opening and the end is what will execute when you call that function. And you can name a function anything that you want to name it. But when you write the function, you're going to write local function, and then you're going to write the name of the function. And I'm just going to call it give tool. And then opening and closing parentheses and enter. And it automatically throws the end for you. So right now my opening is on line 8 and my closing is on line 10. And anything I write in between those two lines is going to be the script that runs or executes whenever I call the function. Okay. Now in the parentheses is where you place parameters. And a parameter is a placeholder variable. And for this function I want that to be player. And I'll describe that a little bit more in a minute. Okay. So the first line of code that I'm going to write an if statement. And I want to look at that Boolean and I want to say if has tool is false, then run the code inside of this if statement. So if has tool equals false, then enter. Okay. I misspelled it. Okay. So whenever you're trying to look at the condition, you use two equal signs, but whenever you're setting it, like when we set the variable, we used one equal sign. Okay, so in an if statement, if you're trying to see what the value is, you're going to use two equal signs. Okay, so anything written inside of the if statement will run or execute if the condition is met. So if has tool is actually false, then the code in here will run. Now, as soon as I start the if statement, I want to immediately change has tool to true. I'm going to flip that Boolean. I'm going to flip the switch to true. Because inside of this if statement, we are going to clone that tool. So now the player will have it. Okay. So I'm going to set a variable to clone the tool. So I'm going to call it local new tool equals, and now I have to set the hierarchy to point to where they're going to clone the tool from. And we already set up the shapes folder in replicated storage under a variable, and we named it shapes. So I'm going to type shapes dot, and I'm going to write out the name of the tool that I want to clone. So if we look in replicated storage under shapes, we can find that tool we created. So whatever you named that tool will be what you write next. And I named mine cross. Okay. And then we're going to put colon clone, open and closing parentheses. Make sure you spell it right. So this is the variable new tool that we created, and it's saying clone shapes.cross. Alright. Now we're going to name this, because new tool isn't the name. New tool is just the variable for it. So I'm going to say local new tool dot name equals, and in quotation marks I'm going to type whatever that name is. And actually, when you type out new tool dot name, you don't put the local. Okay, just say new tool dot name equals cross, because we're not setting up a variable. New tool already exists at this point, so now we're just going to name it. So we say new tool dot name equals cross. Alright, next we're going to anchor. We're going to change the anchor property, because right now if you look in that tool and you click on the handle, it is anchored, and we don't want it to be anchored, because if the player equips the tool When it's anchored, they will get stuck in place. So we're going to type out new tool dot handle dot anchored equals false. Okay, so anchored is a property of the handle. Okay, and right now it's checked, which means it's true. So when this script runs, it's going to change it to false, and it'll uncheck this property. And then now we also need to set a parent for this new tool that we are naming cross, so it knows where to place it. And this is where we're going to be using that player parameter. Okay, so new tool dot parent, and we're considering the hierarchy here, because who is the parent of the cross going to be? It's going to be the player's backpack. So new tool dot parent equals player dot backpack. Now right now the script still doesn't know really what player is. It's still just a placeholder waiting for information. Okay, and the information will be there once the function gets called and the event happens. Okay, and then on the outside of your if statement, we are going to now flip the switch of the boolean and change it back to false. So we're going to say has tool equals false. Okay. Now we're going to connect the function, or call or execute the function. And this function is going to be called when the player clicks the mouse click. Okay, and remember, in our variables we set the variable for the click detector and called it click. So to call this function, we're going to type out click, because that's the click detector, dot mouse click. So that says when this click detector is clicked with a mouse click, connect or execute the function. Okay, and you write that with click dot mouse click colon connect open and closing parentheses. And then inside of the parentheses, we're going to type the name of the function. So that's saying when the mouse click happens, connect and execute this function. Okay, and this is when the placeholder is now recognized, which is going to be the player. The event is the mouse click, and when the player on the client side clicks the mouse click button to grab that object, it now sees the player and grabs it and knows that player goes into this placeholder and it goes into their backpack. Okay. Alright, so that's the script, and we'll test it in a minute, but there's a couple more things we need to do before we try this. If you look in your Explorer window and click on the handle, we need to make sure that the maskless and the can collide properties of this tool on the handle are set up properly. So we want maskless to be true. It kind of changes the mass of this tool object. Okay? And then can collide we want it to be false, so it should be unchecked. So make sure you set that up for your tools that are sitting in replicated storage. That way when the player does equip the tool, they can handle it properly and they don't, get thrown or get dropped down to the floor, to the base plate, and fall over. And then the final thing is the tool grip. So if you have not set up this, then you don't know where the player is going to be gripping this tool. So I'm going to go ahead and press play, and we're going to test this and see what it looks like. Okay, and at the same time we're testing our script. So I'm going to click it, and it did put the tool in my backpack, so the script is working properly. And now I'm going to click on it to equip it. Okay, and so now I've got the tool, but it's not in my hand. It's just sitting here in some weird position, and that's not really what I want. So in order to fix this, you can use something called Tool Grip Editor, which makes it easy to change the position of the grip of that tool. And you can find Tool Grip Editor in the toolbox, and I've already got it installed. So I'm going to click on it just to show you, once you have this plugin in your studio, what you can do. So when you use the Tool Grip Editor, you have to have your tool highlighted in the Explorer bar. Okay? And once you highlight that tool in the Explorer bar, you'll see the message down here below called Edit Tool Grip in the blue and white. Click on it. And so you've got kind of a view of a player here, so you can look and see how to move it around. And you have a move option and a rotate option. And so what you can do is use this to play around with the tool to see how you need to change it so that it is actually being gripped by the player in the way that you want it to be. And you can see how I'm moving the hand around. Okay, and you can use your view selector to kind of change your view also in the screen. And so now it looks like it's up and right, but is the cross facing in the correct direction? It looks like it. Okay, but I think I want to move it over a little bit. And then up. Okay, so that looks decent to me. I'm going to test this again and see if it's actually positioned the way that it now looks like it's actually in the player's hand. Yes, that looks much better. And you could change this even more, but this looks pretty good to me. So this concludes this section of the tutorial, and I will see you in the next section.